Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whenever you happenstance into this truth bomb dialogue with my close friend, one of my favorite people on the planet, associate, colleague, a gentleman that needs no introduction to those of you who know who we are, but hopefully there's millions out there that are going to start discovering who we are and absolutely do need an introduction because I'm sure you feel like I do sometimes. It just is Groundhog Day. Bill Murray, we tell pretty much the same story
Right.
with just different threads. But my name is Patrick Lovell. I like to refer to myself as the producer with the $71 trillion truth. And this is my associate and a wonderful longtime friend, Eric S. Vaughn, the proprietor of Redpoint Digital Media, also the face of Corruption Incorporated, The American Way, which you've got to discover on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, and a variety of other shorts that you can find throughout social media and so forth. But I guess just to set the table, let's just go like this really quickly, just to get it out of the
Right.
way, okay? And let's think of this as like an exercise in like 3 minutes of an introduction. Eric, who are you? What do you do?
Oh, so so who am I? I'm a filmmaker and business owner and podcaster. Uh basically I have been sort of dragging this tiger by the tail, same as you, since 2011, right? So I think that that's basically the major touchstones is that yeah we've been chasing down corruption in all of its various forms on the systemic level together since yeah I think it was what was it it had to have been
It
yeah
was 20
it
it
was
was
2011.
2011. It was 2011 when
Yeah.
we first started going down this path, but you and I had been working together long before that. So I
Oh,
think
certainly.
approaching our 20th anniversary being together, and it feels like yesterday for me. And I'll just say, what I've said before on several of our recordings, but I think it bears repeating because we want to get people to understand who we are because we're going to do this on an ongoing basis because everything that we've been in the midst of for that long and then some is playing out in front of our eyes on a daily basis in a monumental way that we're gonna dig into. But my friends, Eric is a tremendous talent. He's probably one of the most coherent what's the word I'm looking for, he's almost like this atmosphere of DIY. He's a guy that can do just about everything from writing, directing, to producing, to doing technical stuff behind the scenes. I've never seen somebody in my life. He's like a magician, and he's just an extraordinary
You
talent.
are being too kind.
No, I'm not. I'm being completely on point. But really, when it comes to our relationship, you know we were working before in an incredible way, working on a television show. That's where we first came into contact with one another. And we were producing this feel good syndicated television show. We were giving away houses all over the country. And it was a pretty big deal. We were, the EP of the show was flying around on a Gulfstream 5. They were from a large commercial and residential developer out of the Northwest with huge projects all over the West. And they had hooked up with our executive producers, who are our bosses. And we thought it was just a kind of a feel good show. But as we started to dig in, we found out that we were part of something much bigger that we wouldn't really fully understand until years later, that unfortunately has, never ended. Okay. And so I'm going to,
Right.
yeah, go ahead. You can pick up on that.
No, I was just going to say that you're 100% correct, and we didn't know what we were actually involved in until after the whole affair was over. But one of the things that I'll always remember, um, see, I'm trying to remember, were you were you one of my producers? Because we always switched back and forth, who's the lead producer and who's going to be, kind of backing them up. Do you remember the Chicago episode?
Oh, absolutely. I was definitely lock and step with you the whole time, man.
Right. So that Chicago episode was the strangest one, and in a way, kind of thinking back, was possibly the most telling because remember, they didn't take the house,
That's right.
and it was because the guy, I mean, the guy, like, we set up the whole DJ booth and the whole thing, and the guy was totally into it. But remember, his wife was in real estate,
That's right. Well,
right?
and
And
well,
she and she 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 and when they were in, so after the big reveal at the end of the show. and all the recordings done, they take them into a room and stuff like that, and they go over, okay, well, this is the deal. This is what you get. You either get the house and all this other stuff, or you can walk away with like, what was it, like $10,000 or
I think
something
so.
like
Yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And so, and uh, and they took the money. And I remember all of us being shocked. It's like, I mean, really? I mean, why wouldn't you just get the house and then like, resell it or something like that, or whatever the case might be? But when we thought, well, I mean, it's we know that they're not dumb, and well, wait a second, she's in real estate. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's just like something in the market, whatever the case might be. But in retrospect, you know that she saw that contract and was like, not only no, but hell no.
Well, yeah, and as we learned later, and I remember shooting because they were an African American couple, and I remember shooting or being in the vicinity of Gretna Green, which is one of the more notorious, low income neighborhoods that were publicly funded, back in the '70s, kind of thing, and unbelievable crime. And I remember we were actually tapped into Barack Obama at the time, before he became president, as a matter of fact, which was like a year and a half before that. And we were thinking about his being involved with, organizing, and we were kind of looking at, the nature of being in those types of places in Chicago, which had tremendous amounts of crime. But we also were starting, well, we didn't really fully understand it until later, but the nature of predatory loans, especially in minority neighborhoods. And so, to your point, that's absolutely a perfect stepping off point to why I just sent you this email 5 minutes ago and said, "Hey, can you record right now?" And we're recording, by the way, on, I believe it's Thursday, August 21st, 2025, at approximately 11 a.m. my time. And based on what we were just talking about, front page of the New York Times, just like front page of the New York Times yesterday. Yesterday, Trump decides to go on the warpath against a Fed board governor for being guilty of mortgage fraud. Okay, that's yesterday.
That is the classic pot calling the kettle black, I think.
Well, there you go. But but
Right.
but here's the next step of the whole thing. And that this is in continuity and in continuation of his offensive against Jerome Powell because they want to lower interest rates, yada yada yada, and that's a big deal, all things considered. But today, 30 minutes ago, I get a notification from the New York Times that a, a court of appeals in New York, through a split decision, decided to eradicate the $500 billion, the $500 million fine of Donald Trump for what Letitia James had gotten the civil settlement based on fraud, which was supposedly fraud on the bank. Okay, so these are the
Right.
two columns that are now, let's remind our viewers of what we were just talking about. It's 2025. When you and I were doing that, it was 2007. Okay, so what we were in the midst of is exactly what we're now kind of on the tail end that, and I'm going to offer my composite opinion on, but let me just finish this one key consideration to let you riff on. So, as we kind of wade through the whole thing of Epstein, right? One of the biggest things since Donald Trump, so belligerently and awkwardly said, "What you're still thinking about this creep Donald? Excuse me, Epstein." Like what, a month ago, when of course, that was one of the key considerations of the MAGA sort of campaign, that there was going to be revelations of all of the elites that were in on Epstein and what that means and so forth. And of course, he tries to basically kick it off the table because, or put it under the rug because he's on the list, and we know he's on the list because his Department of Justice told him he's on the list and everything that accrues. But some people might be thinking about, okay, I don't get it. What's the connection here? Epstein is about children being preyed upon by disgusting old elite rich men for some reason, but they kind of get stuck there. Meanwhile, what you and I both know, and what's been elicited the last several days, which is just quite remarkable considering how long ago it was, but as it turns out, Epstein ran a fund that was hiding money for the uber rich called Liquid. And he was doing that under the umbrella of Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns goes belly up in 2007 because of
Right.
everything we're talking about. But as it turns out, there is a move by, at this point, not many people understand this except those of us who are in the trenches on this story, that there was a um, uh, engineered move by, at the time, the Secretary of the Treasury, who was John Paulson, the head of the New York Federal Reserve at the time, who was Timothy Geithner. And they met with the 13 largest banks in the United States and the world, quite frankly. That included
Hmm.
Deutsche Bank. And at that time, Paulson had maneuvered with then and continues to be CEO of JP Morgan Chase, a scenario where there were going to be these sort of shared accrued bailouts by the too big to fail banks themselves. And that was before we called them too big to fail banks, to bail out Bear Stearns, which was also connected to Jeffrey Epstein. And as it turns out, we could go on and on and on. But I'm just going to stop right there and let you riff.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I think that that is that is so I know how you're setting this up, but I was listening to something today, and an interesting thing came up that evidently the Republicans are trying to neuter. And it's this little thing that I've heard you talk about from time to time called the Federal Reserve Act 13
13-3, 13-3,
13.3.
13,
Yes, sorry,
parentheses,
1303.
yeah.
And that just came up today.
I didn't see that. Interesting.
Yeah. No, it appears as though the Republicans are trying to basically completely neutralize that.
Whoa. I wonder what would be the causality there. But anyway, please continue.
But it's just like it's the main thing. I mean, it's just like Doge, right? They're trying to get rid of anything. You see, the biggest difference between now and the con was that back during the con era, they were trying to figure out how to get around regulation, how to get around all the laws, how to get around all the rules, and they're quite good at it. But now, in the age of Doge and the age of Trump, they just destroy it completely so that there's nothing at all standing in the way. There's no subterfuge at all. There's no need to go around anything. They just like simplify it and say, no, we're just going to make this completely lawless. And since we know that we have all the money, all the everything, we're just going to shove our way down everybody's throats and, anybody else be damned. And I think you're on
So
mute.
that is an interesting corollary. I hope I can remember what I want to say. Please continue.
And then you think about this drive, this push to try to lower interest rates. You're trying to lower interest rates when the CPI is showing that inflation is maybe not as hard as they were thinking, but it's certainly going up. And then more importantly, the PPI had a massive spike, which means that the wave is coming, right? That inflation is going to be going through the roof. Now, you match that with like employment numbers. I mean, we are at a point to where I think that our employment numbers run the risk of actually being negative, negative. And so you have people who, you have people who are losing jobs, right? You have like all these federal employees who've already lost their jobs. There's no sector that's really hiring except for medicine. And even there, that's bound to like slow down because of all the cuts that are being made there. So if you have no work for people, their ability to buy anything is being reduced. Oh, and everything else is becoming more expensive. You're setting up a scenario to where everything and everyone gets completely pushed out of the market except for that tiniest sliver of people at the very, very top. And so the only logical reason why you'd want to lower interest rates is so that you can go in and as everything collapses around you, they buy everything on the cheap. Everything. And this has already happened. I mean, post 2008, that's exactly what kind of what was happening. And one of the reasons why our rents and our housing is so damn expensive right now, amongst everything else. I mean, any asset is more expensive now because of that. But this is going to be going through the next level. And
Right. Well, again, it's a perpetuation and continuation. And you and I both know from our conversations and our studies and everything else that, look, there was a version of this in the, imperialist age of the 1700s that led directly to the American Revolution, of course, and then many other things. But there was a notion of smash and grab, and there's a methodology, and I'm not going to litigate what that means or provide the historical context right now. But there are so many parallels in terms of how absolute control, what is the saying? How does the saying, the absolute control, wait, what is it?
Is that absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Absolute power corrupts absolutely. But that's part and parcel, especially when you've got a whole bunch of people like we learned Bastiat, and he's from the 17th century. When a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. That's what we're in the midst of. You and I have known that. And so,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I mean, but I mean, we are being so set up for a dystopian future that I think it goes beyond, what some of our science fiction authors have ever written. I mean, when you think about how people are being pushed out of housing on a constant basis, and there's a great book out there called No Place of Our Own, by, I can't remember his name, but it's about the working homeless, like people who have full-time jobs who can't, who are homeless. I mean, that is absolutely insane that that can possibly happen in any country, but especially ours, right? I mean, the wealthiest country in the world still, and and we can't, and that's like a reality. It's shameful, it's embarrassing,
But it's engineered. It's
it is
engineered, but
engineered.
that's why we are, and we have to get people to understand that the information that we have, that my colleague and I spent years and years and thousands of hours and more money than you can comprehend aggregating. What is the blueprint of all of this, which is really the first part of it, which you can find currently at thecon.tv. But I'm going to bring it back to the beginning of this conversation. And I hope to God I can remember what it was that I said. God, I plugged that away for later because you said such an important part that really closes the loop on a lot of this stuff. But let me reset the table from where I started with. Okay. So yesterday, Donald Trump says, I'm going after a Fed board governor for mortgage fraud. He's also going after publicly Adam Schiff for mortgage fraud. You and I both know from several of our key vectors of information that we rely upon. We work with some of the brightest and the most veteran journalists and experts in all things corruption and all things Donald Trump by way of David K. Johnston, who has revealed to us that Donald Trump's been involved with this sort of thing really going back to the 80s. And you and I both know this because our mentor, a gentleman by the name of Bill Black, because of our work, has led us to understand what we know is control fraud. And control fraud is this criminal theory that is built on what came out of the savings and loan crisis, where a lot of this stuff starts. Specifically, Donald Trump. Donald Trump comes up in the 70s. He's this developer. He comes out of Queens. He's and he inherits, a fortune. He gets involved with real estate in New York. At that time, New York is basically what are some of my favorite movies of that time? Like, boy, I'm thinking, talking about dystopia. You remember what was it?
Like Goodfellas or something like
No,
that, or
even before that, like not Gangs of New York because that's Scorsese too. Jesus, it's like Escape from New York is what I'm thinking of, right?
oh yeah, 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 no, much more appropriate.
Right. That sort of thing.
Uh,
And there was there,
uh,
and what was the one with all of the different gangs? It wasn't Killers. It was like, and it was that song
Warriors?
Warriors. Yes, Warriors. Yes,
Yeah.
that depiction of New York. New York was in a chaos structure in the 70s, right? And quite frankly, the five families of New York had an incredible uh, sort of orbit of power. You couldn't build a New York without without the five families, without being enmeshed in organized crime. And Donald Trump, when he got his foot into Manhattan, was doing that. And there's a lot of ways that he was getting certain projects built and renovations and so on and so forth because of tax initiatives and trying to bring money back to New York, big money back to New York. Because what happened in New York was what happened around the United States. We got rid of the middle class. They got rid of the industry. They got rid of the industrial powerhouse that we were to ultimately become a financial powerhouse. And in that process, real estate became kind of the zenith of really the big money that was coming into the island, Manhattan. And a lot of that was through, quite frankly, money laundering. And we didn't know that until many, many, many years later. But going back to what people need to understand, how this whole thing is the same story, like I said, many people get caught up in the Epstein scenario because the victims, these young girls that were being raped, were trying to tell the mainstream media at the time, and everybody was ignoring it because, of course, mainstream media couldn't go anywhere near Epstein specifically because I would say the leadership of the DNC and also Clinton and so on and so forth. But it was toxic to even go close to Epstein at that time period. I'm talking about 2004, 2005 ish. And so a lot of people now in 2025, because of what's going on with the Epstein files, are like, oh my God, they tried to tell the story the whole time and mainstream media sat on it. Okay, well, people, what we're here to tell you is they've been sitting on a lot of information for now decades, much of which Eric and I are going to reveal to you in this ongoing sort of chapter and verse as we move forward, reacting to some of the things that are revealing themselves. But going back to Donald Trump going after a Fed Reserve governor for mortgage fraud and Adam Schiff for mortgage fraud, and then the other headline that he's now getting out of this $500 million fine that Letitia James nailed on him that would have led to Donald Trump's seventh bankruptcy had he not actually been able to steal the presidency. And I say that because I believe that's exactly what happened in
Mhm.
2024. But what Letitia James didn't do and what she failed to do, and you see, different orbits of this online,
Yep.
is that, here's this element of Donald Trump's retribution, right? But what these people fail to understand about Letitia James is Letitia James makes the case for what we call control fraud. She starts and ends with appraisal fraud. We know that the crimes of Trump were egregious because he was literally doubling the size of his penthouse. He was quadrupling the square foot appraisal because of the way it works with appraisals based on comparables and everything else. And he was doing this throughout his entire apparatus of real estate, but they knew specifically that his penthouse was like, let's call it 6,000 square feet. I think he says it's 30,000 square feet. The per, unit was probably selling in the building for somewhere in the, I don't know, let's call it $200 range. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but he like quadrupled it. Okay. So the appraisal fraud was egregious. That was basically the anchor of the case of Letitia James of defrauding on behalf of Donald Trump, defrauding the bank, which in this case was Deutsche Bank. Now, what she didn't understand and what our work reveals is that the bank, in this case, Deutsche Bank, was in on it. Now,
Right.
ironically, they were really in on it because they were connected to, of all people, Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin, since the 80s, and the Russian oligarchs have been among all of the world's international crooks, have been laundering ill-gotten gains into Manhattan real estate. You might remember we knew Louise Story, who did that wonderful
Right.
series in the New York Times,
Towers of Secrecy. Yeah.
Towers of Secrecy. And what
Great
happened to her?
series.
She ends up getting disappeared from the New York Times not too long after that, by the way. Not saying I know that for a fact was the reason. Maybe she had better opportunities. Who knows? But long and the short of it is that this story is the exact same story that Eric and I lived and that we're telling you about, and that mainstream media can't connect the dots. And so the headline reads in the New York Times this morning, the idea, if you're a MAGA or somebody who doesn't understand the types of things that we're talking about, is that, oh, Letitia James, basically was using this as a political freaking tool to try to take down Trump. And it was something that, was exactly what they sold MAGA on. And he is innocent of fraud charges. No, he's not innocent of fraud charges. The appeals court is using it as a headline to say that they're not, that the fine was egregious. And meanwhile, Letitia James, the state AG of New York, did not even come close to making the case of what was actually going on. Donald
Right.
Trump was using appraisal fraud to get loans from banks because that was the business model of the entirety of Wall Street, and I dare say continues to be. So I'll let you respond to that first.
Well, I think that this also reveals the fact that Letitia James didn't learn the lessons of the 2008 financial crisis
Amen.
and every crisis since the savings and loan. because what made the savings and loan crisis, at least the aftermath of it, different from every other financial crisis since then, with the possible exception of Enron to some extent,
Right.
was that they didn't settle for suits. They made criminal prosecutions. I am so fucking sick of all of these of all these like AGs and district attorneys and whatever not going for the criminal prosecution because
The chicken shit club. Yep.
you want to end this, you have to prosecute criminally. They have to see jail. That's something that could at least slow this down.
That's the same thing
But
to what people are calling for in Epstein, for example, right? I mean, come on. That's the
right,
whole
right,
idea.
right,
You think it's
exactly,
injustice?
exactly.
All right.
I mean, and so they need to stop doing this. We need to stop treating financial crimes as if they're like misdemeanors, as if they're like somehow, not as destructive than street crime, when we know for a fact that they are many, multiple times more destructive, kill more people, steal more money than all the street thieves in the entire planet could do. They can do on one deal in one day.
Amen. The damage is so immense, it's beyond comprehension. I call it
And we
financial
and we
terrorism.
send them to Club Fed, right?
Yeah.
It's
In the
like,
case of
no.
Tulane, yeah. Well, all of them.
If anybody needs to go to ECOT, it's it's these financial criminals.
Bang it, bingo. And so, like, for example, for me, like, okay, a lot of people are all over social media, and I think in mainstream media specifically, are like, oh my God, look, Gavin Newsom is actually drawing a line in the sand, and he's to be celebrated because he's getting really good at trolling. Okay. Oh, that's great. But, I don't see Gavin Newsom talking about financial terrorism and taking out the oligarchs. Well, because all you have to do is a quick Google search, and I don't know all of the ins and outs of Newsom, but I can tell you that he came out of the Getty Empire, which is like the richest family in San Francisco and tied to oil, and are the definition of oligarchs. So I don't think
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
you know,
No, I agree 100% on that. I mean, when it comes right down to it, I mean, Gavin Newsom is a I guess in his own way a charismatic but basically standard new Democrat,
right.
right?
Well, I'm
Like
glad he's fighting and sticking it
post
to
Clinton Democrat.
Trump.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. 10 times out of 10, I'd rather have Newsom be our president than Trump. I'll go so far as to say that, but that is the lowest bar that you can possibly have in
Amen.
this day and age.
Amen. Because you and I have the answers. And let me continue this forward from this perspective to get you the next round of reaction. So great. You and I have now just illustrated in a very brief way that the crime that Donald Trump was immersed in not only was much larger than what Letitia James had brought the case to reveal that she got a settlement for, that now the appellate court or the district court is now wiping their hands of. Because why? Because corruption is naked. Because what the courts are saying, especially emanating from the Supreme Court and all of the stuff that we've seen because of what's happened with, Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation and their placement of judges all over the country. Of course, I haven't heard much from Eileen Cannon recently, but it's the same kind of stuff. They're like, fuck you, America. You don't know what the law is. You don't know exactly what we're in the midst of. You don't know how to hold things accountable. And there's nothing you're going to do to stop this. So suck on it. That's what it feels like to me, because it's just this opaque scenario, and all it is headlines, and nobody in mainstream media can decipher this scenario. And it's not the God code. It's not rocket science. It's racketeering. All you have to understand is the predicate acts, and you have to do the investigations that you and I have done, and we've spent years doing, and you have the evidence that shows, oh, they broke the fucking law. Now, the other thing that makes my head want to explode is we all knew that when the Supreme Court said, oh, Donald Trump or the presidency is the unitary executive presidency that is above the law when he's working on behalf of the American people while in office. So he has immunity from the law. Hey, hello, etch a sketch, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, right in front of our eyes in American history. And everybody's like, what? Nobody's doing anything. But beyond that, the next step of this situation that's in front of our face that's relevant that I wanted to just touch upon and get your comment on is that you opened up with Federal Reserve Act 13.3, and I really appreciate that. But when Donald Trump is going after the Board of Governor for mortgage fraud, and same with Adam Schiff, the entirety of Trump's business model, starting with all of his projects in Manhattan, but more so, really, the easiest thing to prove is all the stuff that happened in Atlantic City with his casinos that were all predicated on junk bonds and control fraud with savings and loan that were baked into the, Predators ball, which was Michael Milken, and all things
Right.
Drexel Burnham Lambert at that time period of the junk bond madness and savings and loan crisis, which all of this stuff emanates from. But think about this because, again, Donald Trump's entire psychology is lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate. That's the dance, right? Roofie, rape, pillage. Nobody's going to do anything about it. But we literally saw Donald Trump in Alaska and he thought he was going to Russia. That's how stupid this orange transactional treasonous pedophile pig is. When he said, when he
Right.
goes to meet the beast with Putin, and Putin's in the beast, right? And Putin's been a part of this for 30 years. They've been laundering money through Deutsche Bank into Trump real estate and many other things, including, by the way, vis-a-vis Steve Mnuchin into Hollywood. That's another way of the money that was laundering. And I know a lot of guys that were in the midst of that, by the way. And beyond all of that, the Federal Reserve is where I was going with this mortgage fraud, right? So in addition to him, trying to turn the tables and blame and implicate the Federal Reserve for mortgage fraud, and same with what he calls shifty shift. He's saying that Obama and all of the Dems were using documentation fabrication to falsify the 2020 election and to also, and this is all going to play out with the Epstein files, to frame him where he's innocent of all of this when we know he's been in the midst of it the whole time. And so going back to the Federal Reserve
Right.
and to Letitia James and to the Supreme Court and to everybody involved with any modicum of the law of the last 30 years, their failure, especially Obama and Eric Holder, their failure to prosecute the law, to go after criminality, like you said, with Jesse Eisinger's chicken shit club, is boy, did they leave the opportunity open for this fascist empire to take root, to turn the tables on them.
And it's still, that wound is still completely and wide open. And the exact reason why Trump is able to operate the way he operates is because he knows for a fact that the Dems or anybody who opposes, well, the Dems, because they are also part of the power elite, because the Dems basically can't do anything, right? He knows that they cannot point the criminal finger at him without implicating their own. And that's why nothing's happening with Epstein. That's why nothing's ever happened with financial crimes. And that's why it's going to continue to happen until we kick out all of them, until every single person who's part of the power elite, who has something to hide, who is involved with criminal activity, is extricated from our government, from our country. We're going to continue to deal with this. I mean, the only thing that makes Trump different than anybody else in the Republican Party or anybody else in the top end of the Democratic Party is that he's kind of gotten that magic potion from, I mean, from Colonel Kurtz, right? In Apocalypse Now. He's willing to call everybody else out on it. He is the only person who has I don't want to give him credit. I don't want to sound like I'm giving him credit, but he's the only person who I don't want to say, let me try to put it this way. He's the only person who has the audacity, right? To basically, for all intents and purposes, admit to every single thing that he does through every accusation that he makes, because he knows that the other side of that is so toothless because I'm going to accuse you of this because you can't come after me without showing your own hand. and he knows this.
Yeah, well, dude,
And
that
the Dems are the reason why the Dems are toothless is because they are just as fucking guilty as the Republicans on all of this.
I set the timer, and I'm gonna end with this note, and to be continued, and we got to keep doing this. But first of all, I love that quote about Colonel Kurtz, Charlie don't surf. But it reminded me of what Bill taught us, that the banks go to the Fed and the Congress and say, does he say, stop me, don't stop me or I'll shoot, or I got that
Right, right.
right? Stop me or I'll shoot, right? It's kind of like you take me down, you take the whole system down. That's exactly what you're talking about. But again, let's think about this constructually, and then we'll end on this note, and I'll give you the last word. The nature of think about this. It's just playing out in front of our eyes, and it drives me freaking nuts because it is literally the emperor's new clothes. And I'll throw in a gonzo stipulation on really bad acid because the nature of it is, look, to your point, go ahead, take me down. I'll take the whole system down. And I'm like, almost in a way, because of where we're sitting and what we've done. Thank you, Donald. You're legitimizing everything we have been saying, but we have been quashed by the same system that can't let this information out. And we need people to like, subscribe, and share, discover what we've done at the con.tv, discover Corruption Incorporated, The American Way, discover all of the shorts that you're putting out that are absolutely brilliant, because we're plugged in to the people who have been on the right side of this for 30 to 40 freaking years, man. And this is like, it seems like it's coming to an end, but at the same time, it's like it's just the beginning, and it just, where it goes and how it goes, it's dependent on whether or not millions of us are going to wake up with the facts and realize what's going on here. And I'll save this idea for future episodes. I hold that really Donald Trump and, this coke octopus that we've really seen since Occupy Wall Street ultimately is this continuation. If you see pictures of Fred Koch, which is the father of both the David and Charles Koch, who created all of these empires, the Heritage and Enterprise, and so on and so forth, and got all of these billionaires involved with this whole thing over the course of decades because they're libertarian pigs that want complete control. And don't forget all of the places we've been on our journey, especially inside the libertarian labyrinth, especially in Chicago, I'm reminded of. And we'll talk about that some other time. But what they were able to do with, basically pulling the wool over everybody's eyes is because everything's a facade, right? But the one thing that you and I both know is that the global economy is still built on the fossil fuel matrix. And the fossil fuel matrix is front and center, and that feeds real estate, that feeds commodities, that feeds all of these different things, on the Wall Street meritocracy, the global reserve currency. It feels like Trump is just this sort of transactional scenario to destroy the innovation and the progression of the last 30 years that could have easily moved us into renewable energy. And that's another part of this. But I just want to finish up with this, right? Again, we all know Putin and Trump are up to no good. Why? Because they've been involved with the criminal syndicate for the past 30 years. What was Putin doing? He was extracting all of the resource, valuable resources of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, throwing all of the upside through the oligarchic matrix into the West commodities, particularly real estate, which dovetailed him directly into Trump. Trump's been involved with this, of course, with their modeling agencies and their pageant in Moscow, and whatever sort of smut that Putin has on Trump. But of course, all things Epstein were not just about setting up rich people for hijacking. It was about controlling the money flow. How do we know? Well, we know that JP Morgan Chase, at the behest of the Treasury Secretary John Paulson, with the New York Federal Reserve Chairman, met with 13 banks to bail out what was liquid capital based on all of the stuff we're talking about, because they were throwing the money into subprime. That's what it was. They were throwing the money into subprime to create this global racketeering effort going. And then when it got to a certain level, and of course Goldman pulled the thread based on Bear Stearns, because they knew what was happening in the repo markets, and they created this global calamity. Who was there to pick up the pieces and bail out the oligarchs? That is a question, Eric. Who was there?
who was there to pick up all the pieces and bail out the oligarchs?
Who bailed out too big to fail?
Oh, well, I mean, that was, the list is long, but I mean,
Well, no, no, but I know where you're going with your
I
head.
mean, go ahead.
I know where you're going with your head because you're right. Because what you're going through TARP, you're going through all of the different elements that took place, but it was ultimately the Federal Reserve.
Right, right.
Go ahead.
So yeah, what I was going to say ultimately was that it was going to be our sovereign currency,
Amen.
right? I mean,
Yes,
it basically through decree makes request to the Fed to go ahead and give it all to the billionaires.
that's right. And what
So
do they do with that?
buy more assets,
Including,
buy more assets, including real estate, I mean everything. I mean, basically there isn't an asset class that isn't completely hyperinflated, that isn't being hyperinflated because all these assholes have nothing else to do with their goddamn money.
well, that, yeah,
So all they had to do is purchase again and again and again at higher and higher prices, which is why you and I and the government can't own a damn thing, and they own everything. And they're going to get that final squeeze of this rock, getting the last drip of the last drip of whatever out of that rock by
terrible.
lowering interest rates,
Yeah. Okay. Right.
using
Exactly.
tariff policy to put the pressure on Powell in order to get him to either leave or lower interest rates.
Right. Okay. But
Because,
but but it's the guarantee. Okay. It's the full faith
right,
and credit of the United States back guaranteeing the global racketeering effort, including Putin, by the way.
right,
And but here's the last piece of my puzzle that I want to just say for today is that what the American people need to understand, based on what Eric is saying, what is the other asset? Would you consider Congress an asset in this scenario? How about SCOTUS? How about the Department of Justice?
if
How
you're an
about the federal?
oligarch, absolutely they're an asset, and they're the most profitable assets you could possibly purchase.
That's right. So we're not a democracy. It's just tyranny 101. And the
Right,
thing is, it's guys, what you've got to understand. It's the game that your older siblings played with you when you were a child, and they played hide the flag or secret. It's asymmetric information. When the power has all of the cards and they can control all of the outcomes because of corruption. That's all
right.
this is corruption. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just to put a bow on that. There's a reason why no matter who is in office from either of our major parties, that there is no transparency.
That's
They
right.
all talk about it. They all say that there's going to be, but there never actually is, because if there was, then all of them would be out.
Right.
All of them.
And like Kevin Spacey said in The Usual Suspects, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist, which means they're pissing on your head, telling you it's rain. And if you were, uh, you know, um, one of my favorite Denzel Washington and Devil in a Blue Dress. His whole discovery to truth was, I got tired of that, and they must have thought I was some kind of new fool. My message to the audience, our collective audience, please like and subscribe and share. Don't be their fool. It's just a trick of deception. It's a con. Everybody is starting to figure out what you and I figured out years and years ago, and you came up with the name the con. Let me see if I can put you on the spot for one last question.
Okay. All right.
Remind me, if you can kind of sift through this, because of all the things, because we do a million things. Also, this isn't our primary scenario to be able to deliver all of this information to you. We're trying to survive and do other business as well, right? I mean, you've got your fingers in a million, you're juggling a million different things. So when I come out of left field, it might not be readily available in your mind bank, but I have a feeling you're going to get this. When we started looking at this whole deal, and you figured out, because I kept going to the top, right? I kept going to the C suites. I wanted to know what was happening inside the C suites, how they were manipulated, what they were hiding, and why they were hiding. And that's where I was stuck. You, on the other hand, were like, what about the victims? What happens down here? What was the first sort of epiphany that you had when you started looking at it from the ground up?
The first epiphany that I had when I started looking at it from the ground up, um, there were several. I mean, one that the that there was very specific targets, of this, and that they always made. I mean, you talk about asymmetric information. Basically you had people who are typically trusted who are being instructed to lie in order to bring in that loan, right? So the asymmetric information is on the side of the loan brokers, right?
We call
And
that
the
we call
people on
that
the other side,
what do we call that? Affinity fraud.
yeah, when it's coming from somebody, well, like in Addie Polk's case, when it's coming from potentially somebody from her own congregation,
Right.
right? I mean, so there's certainly that. And so, but I think that what was really kind of interesting was the fact that these very wealthy people found so much wealth in the masses of relatively poor people, and they thought that their best play was to extract all of their wealth rather than build something. I mean, heaven forbid you actually like make something of value and do something that's additive, to our society. No, you got to go and steal money from vulnerable communities. That in our what we found out was that that's what our economy is based on. The
Well,
economy is
and
based
then
on the American people being commodities and us not really being citizens of any actual note as far as like the system is concerned. I mean, our political system is for the wealthy. They're the only people who are listened to. They're the only people who have any sway. And any policy that's being made is inuring to their benefit, which means that all we are is a commodity.
right.
We might as well be
You
oil.
remember the first thing I said in Forward 13, I'm not expendable. Chances are you're not either. And, to that point of, God, there was another thing. Jesus Christ, these things come in and out of my head so quickly. But what I was going for, and what I got to give you all the credit in the world for, okay, is, and it's just so crazy considering what our journey ultimately elicited was you were like, what? I'm approaching this like a street crime.
Oh,
Once you
yeah,
started to
yeah,
see all of the people that were involved, and you were like thinking it's true crime as a producer, but then you're like, wait a second, why isn't this Rico? That was the first thing you asked. And I'm like, why isn't it Rico? And then we started going through all of the different elements and teaching ourselves all of the predicate acts of Rico and how the whole thing is structured. And then we discovered, oh my God, it's a
it is Rico.
racketeering, racketeering ring in the
Yeah,
history of the world. But then what has it elicited? Now we've got the Rico presidency. You and I, especially if we had the resources, we could probably find hundreds, if not thousands, of RICO predicate acts every day in this administration from every institution in the United States. So we're racketeering presidency, and it's the emperor's new clothes. Everybody can see the transparent corruption that never ends. And now it's all of this other insanity, which was the subject of what we were talking about in this particular, we'll call it episode 1 of In Focus with Patrick and Eric, our own version of the new Untouchables, as we, reveal more and more of our information. Because I can promise you, my friends, what Eric and I just touched upon just scratches the surface of what we've learned on our journey. And I want to encourage everybody again, check out thecon.tv, check out Corruption Incorporated, The American Way. Please check out thenewuntouchables.com, and please check out thecleannewdeal.org. Hey, thanks for taking time out of your busy morning. I look forward to talking to you soon to catch up on all the good stuff that's going on, and we'll talk soon.
all right, take care, man.
Take care. Bye.